So I'm Neil. My name is Neil Perkin. So I'm a consultant and do lots of different things. But my background is media owner side. Actually, I was at IPC Media for about 14 years and did the digital side of their business for about 10 years. Lots of different stuff. So I kind of sat in the centre of the business. I wasn't aligned to any particular brand, but tend to get sort of parachuted in to work on MPD and all sorts of different things and launch digital properties and things like that. So James, following off from James talking about skunks and pirates, I'm going to talk about bats and pizzas. Yeah, so I've talked a lot about agility for about four years now, because I think working in a large organisation, I think you can get quite frustrated sometimes at the kind of slow pace of change within organisations. And everybody sort of talks about agility, and increasingly so over those last 4 years, I've noticed there's been this sort of noise around agility and agile processes, and the need to be more agile has got louder and louder over those 4 years, and for a good reason as well. So actually James talked about this, so he's stolen my thunder on this one, but here's the chart about Richard Foster of Yale University talking about the average lifespan of companies, which is quite a stark chart, isn't it? But I'm going to give you another one, which is an IBM survey that they did, I think, about a year and a half ago. And they interviewed about 1,700 CMOs globally, and they were kind of asking them about sort of areas of change and challenge and things like that. There was an interesting kind of stat that came out about that. About 80% of them, 80% of those 1,700 CMOs were seeing a degree of complexity coming down the line, a much higher degree of complexity in their own marketplaces, but only half of them were feeling ready to deal with the amount of complexity that was coming down the line that they were anticipating. So, everybody, I think, is feeling this kind of pressure from the rate of change which is happening within their marketplaces. So, what does agility look like, or digital transformation, if you like, within organisations? I don't really think it looks like that. This is something I saw yesterday, actually. It was Fox News had just done this thing where they've revamped their newsroom. And this is where the bats thing comes in. It was like, I think they're called big area touch screens. I think they were, yeah, it's real, yeah, it's real. There's a video, if you go to, I think it was on The Verge or something, but if you watch the video, it's incredible. This guy, he was like talking through what they did, but they sort of spent months rebuilding their newsroom, and then they had these things which were built by Microsoft. I mean, it looks like a parody, but it's actually real. So radiation on his face. Yes, I know. Yeah, exactly, absolutely. So that to me, I think, says a lot about what digital innovation and transformation isn't. But coincidentally, on the same day, this was yesterday, I don't know if anybody saw Lionel Barber's memo at the FT, talking about what digital first means for them. And that was actually, if you look it up, it's a great sort of piece talking about the importance of working practices and processes, and how what digital first to them actually means is putting the print product subservient to the web product. In other words, changing things like that when people come into the office, when they leave the office, and when the deadlines, how they run meetings. This is the kind of stuff that really matters for agility, not bats or big area touchscreens. So there was a kind of a survey that was an interesting study done by MIT and Capgemini, which I kind of use a lot because it says a lot about that sort of tendency towards kind of, I call it the digital magpie syndrome, to kind of go after that sort of shiny new technology without all of the sort of fundamental stuff underneath. And this was, they were mapping sort of digital maturity across organisations. So there was two axes here. One's called digital intensity, and this was the capability of companies to use new technologies to drive change. So it's all about the shiny new technology. This one is about the kind of leadership capability. So things underpinning that, like strategy and processes, all the kind of stuff that comes from leadership. So you've got that kind of double axis here. So there's a couple of interesting things about this. One is that top quadrille up there. So the digerati, the people who'd combined both the advanced technology but also the leadership capability, so the strategy and process and people and behaviour and stuff that sits around technology, were 26% more profitable across 400 companies, and a long-term study this was, 26% more profitable than average. But this is the other interesting one. If you sort of pursue shiny new technology, without necessarily the underpinning structures and strategies and processes and things, then it can actually damage your business. So that says a lot, I think, for the impact of agility. So of course we all know that kind of agile processes. So what I end up talking to companies a lot about is two things. One, about the progression of agility through the business, because it's not just about how it sits in the tech team and how you sort of build stuff, but actually all the teams, you know, sooner or later, the teams that sort of interface with the tech team start bumping up against that, because they're working in sort of committee-driven ways, or their cycles are slower, and you know, that creates problems. So you can't really be genuinely agile unless the teams interfacing with the tech teams are starting to work in agile ways as well. But also I think the philosophy and the culture, you know, all the kind of stuff that was outlined in the Agile Manifesto 10 years ago, whatever, all of that stuff I think is really, really important. So for me, this is about people really that we're talking about here. You know, the thing about culture is people are what culture is all about. This is one of my favourite books, Dan Pink, Drive. He talks about the surprising truth about what motivates us. So here he says that actually, he talks about the limitations of money as a motivator within companies. And actually the three things, there's lots of kind of scientific studies that he quotes within this book to prove it. The three things that really motivate people are autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Yeah, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So think about that. If that's what drives productivity, and it drives motivation and engagement of employees and so forth, that's got to be pretty critical to driving a change in culture. So some examples of that. You think about the classic thing about Agile is, of course, is autonomy. You know, it's all about self-organizing teams, and you know, example of Facebook is the kind of top-down, bottom-up combination of that. They still have a vision for where they want to go, but you know, the project leaders have to pitch the engineers in order to get them excited enough to want to work on a project. So it's a kind of like bottom-up sanity check, you know, it's like they decide what they want to work on. It's a way that they can check that actually this is a really good thing that we're going to do. It fulfills the vision in an interesting way. So autonomy. Mastery. So Amazon, there was a great talk by Werner Vogel, the CTO of Amazon, talking about this concept of two pizza teams that they have. Yeah? So massive business, Amazon, working in a very small, nimble, agile ways through their organisational structure. So no team in that business gets bigger than 8 to 10 people, or in other words, the number of people that you can comfortably feed with 2 large pizzas, hence two pizza team. Yeah? And it's a way of, you know, as soon as you start to get above 10 people, then you start to need status meetings, and everybody forgets what everybody else is doing, and it starts to slow the whole thing down. So the two pizza team thing is a way of them, you know, maintaining that sort of nimble, agile approach. And I think this is a really interesting way of thinking and way of structuring, you know, processes and also projects within companies. And I know some agencies are working in this way, some forward-thinking agencies are working in a lot more kind of agile ways in terms of putting resource together, multidisciplinary teams, small, nimble, and so forth, rather than thinking in that sort of vertical silo of handoff, which is the normal kind of way of working within most agencies. And then you come to the whole idea of purpose. Yeah. So for me, the interesting sort of spaces in our industry are the kind of two ends of the spectrum: the sort of creative end, but also the sort of scientific and sort of technical end. And this is very much the creative end. Pixar is a fascinating business if you look at the way in which they work. There's a great talk by Ed Catmull, if you Google it, talking about the way in which Pixar work. It's just fascinating. So as a company, they are arguably the most successful film company of all time, because they've had, 12, 13, I think, successive multi-million-dollar hits. No other film company can boast that level of success. Each one of those 12, 13 films, above $500 million in takings. But the way in which they work is they have this kind of multidisciplinary approach, ideas from anywhere, so you don't have to be an animator to come up with a great animation idea. But it's all about vision and purpose. So the way they say that they recognize when somebody is a really good director is not their ability to tell people what to do, but instead that people want to follow the vision that person has, and that it's a compelling vision. So actually they want to be a part of that. So I'd say that was highly motivating and fits well with what Dan Pink was saying. So this is Harper Reid. So he was, James mentioned about the Obama campaign, and I mean, so many learnings from what they did there, but I saw a talk that Harper Reed did at Next Berlin, which was just fantastic. He's such an engaging guy. It's a really amazing talk. But he was talking about the stuff that they did for the Obama campaign. There's a few interesting, there were lots of interesting things out of that talk. But a couple of sort of key takeaways for me were about how they just revolutionised their kind of approach from quite a traditional standpoint. So politicians, don't normally hire technologists, he was saying, but in 2008, I think they had 4 working on the Obama campaign. In 2012, they had 40. So they recognised the kind of benefit of having that kind of skill set in the campaign. But not just that. He built an API, or his team built an API, of course, which enables agility, to enable them to deliver 200 products extremely quickly. That was the job that they had to do, and they had to get it out there and ship very, very quickly. So the only way in which they could do that was to use that common data repository, put an API above it, and then ship 200 products in a very short space of time. And not be afraid to use other people's technology. And for big companies, this is a big kind of thing, letting go a bit and not being quite so controlling and not being able to be afraid to sort of build stuff in the cloud or use other people's technology. It's a sort of big move, I think, for many organisations. So, of course, meanwhile in this country, you've got GDS, the Government Digital Service. And I think, I always talk about GDS because I think they are a fascinating case study. I mean, they must be working in the least agile possible environment, government. I mean, wow, all those stakeholders, politics, committees, it's just like about as sticky and unagile as you can possibly get. But there you've got this kind of team of 100 people who have actually delivered an awful lot in a very short space of time, but also very sort of transparent about how they work. And if you just look at the kind of design principles, and they have their 7 principles, which are just like a philosophy for how, I think, for how a lot of companies should work, because it just makes a lot of sense. So they talk about things like starting with the user need, not the government need, designing with real behaviour and so on, and then iterative working, and all the kind of things that just make sense in this sort of agile digital world. So there was a great post written by Mike Bracken called Strategies Delivery. Recommend you look it up. It's just brilliant. It just talks about the way they work. And so he talked about this kind of flipping. And I think there was a lot of this, I think I recognise within many of the companies that I work with and talk to. So he talked about how the old process started with policy, and there was process and systems and all those kind of things. So that led to this kind of classic sort of massively detailed input, and it just slowed stuff down. It was just lengthy, complex, this hugely kind of cumbersome process. And so flipping that to put the user need first completely revolutionised how they did stuff. And then the policy check comes in, really quite late in the day, but actually starts with the user and work backwards, as Jeff Bezos would say. So I'll leave you with a couple of examples, and James talked a bit about some of the different models and skunk works and things like that. And there's a few organisations that I'm aware of doing this kind of thing. And in fact, the reason why I picked that out is because I was talking to the guy actually this morning, but the marketing director of Quote Me Happy. So this is a little skunk works that Aviva, Aviva, not really that innovative, but actually they got this little kind of skunkworks unit and a brand called Quote Me Happy. But the execution, I think, of this is interesting because they have just given them freedom to do what they need to do, to set up a business model in a completely different way. So it's not like they're saying, right, you go and work in that room there and you create something, but actually we need you to use our systems and have our policies, and they have complete freedom to create a new platform, to develop stuff on that platform. And the interesting thing really about that is that they have developed something which is, they've made mistakes along the way and there's lots of learnings they've got, but actually they're getting a lot better, and they've had some real big learnings which have created a level of agility which suddenly the big parent company is taking a lot of notice of that and saying, that's really interesting, the platform that they've got there. Could we scale that platform? That's really interesting, the way that you're working. But they kind of live that agile 2-week sprint approach through the whole organisation. It's just a fascinating example, I think. And the other one is Intuit. And it's cheating a bit because they're a software business, but Intuit in the States, I think, are really interesting. And if you see any of the kind of talks from their CEO, he's a fascinating guy. But so the 70-20-10 thing is something I talk about a lot because for me, the challenge really with organisations is it's all very well sort of talking about agility and experimentation and failing fast and all the rest of it. And the reality is like failure is still not an option in many companies. You know, still the culture is not there to support it. But if you start talking about changing the way you reallocate your resources, then that does change your mindset a bit and it does free stuff up a bit, because suddenly people are, you know, incentivized against different things. So 70-20-10 is a really kind of valuable way of thinking about that. It's of course a model which is used in many different contexts. So Google use 70-20-10 when they talk about resourcing. They're like 70% of your job should be on the core function, 20% should be on related stuff, 10% on stuff which is completely unrelated to your job. And that's the way they, you know, embed freshness and fresh thinking through their organization. But for Intuit, it's all about allocation of resources, you know, and I love the kind of analogy at the end there. You know, it's like 70% is your kind of core oldest products. So that's all about maintenance and just keeping the profit going. They're like your rowing team, you know, rowing away. And then you've got 20%, which is about optimization, amplification. So this is, the job there is all about increasing profit, increasing share. And then you're like your white water raft is a bit more dangerous and a bit more kind of a little bit ooh, little bit ah. And then your 10%, yeah? So your 10% is your kind of high risk stuff. And this is like you're kind of diving for sunken treasure, if you like. But that's a way of like, this is always the stuff that gets cut in organizations, isn't it? As soon as there's a budget freeze or you know, pressure on resources, it's always the first thing to go. But that is an approach which means that it's much less likely that that's going to happen, I think. It's fascinating. Okay, so that's me. So thank you very much for your time.